Okay, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the organizers to allow me to speak to you about pharmacy. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, yes, we can see. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. My name is Asad Merchant. A bit of a background about myself. I graduated from the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy in 2010 with a Doctor of Pharmacy degree. I also have my MBA from Rutgers Business School, which I obtained in 2019. My past work experience, I worked as a staff pharmacist. Once I graduated from pharmacy school, I worked for CVS Pharmacy for about 2.5 years as a retail pharmacist before moving on to a role in Pfizer as a safety surveillance associate. This is more of a drug safety or pharmacovigilance role where we do a lot of adverse event reporting, case processing, and report presentations to the various health organizations around the world, such as the FDA. Then in January 2019, I transitioned to more of a business role in Worldwide Safety Advisor as a business operations specialist. Here, I work with operations planning, business planning, resource and vendor management for Worldwide Safety Advisor. Three of the roles I will be discussing or focusing on during my presentation is community pharmacy, which is like retail pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, and pharmaceutical industry. But just so you're aware, with a pharmacy degree, there are a wide range of areas you can go into a practice with your license. So community pharmacy, as I said, it's like retail pharmacy. It's like working at your local CVS, Walgreens, or even an independent mom and pop shop. Here, what you do is you do fill prescriptions that come in. You're on the phone with doctors. You have a lot of face-to-face time with patients, and you're answering all their questions, anything that they may need or help with their medication. Hospital pharmacy, you could be a specialized pharmacist in a hospital, such as critical care, emergency, oncology, pediatrics. Some of these may require residencies, though they're not always required. Or you could be working in the on-site pharmacy in a hospital where you're in the literal pharmacy of the hospital, filling orders that come in from physicians and nurses, on the phone with doctors and nurses. And sometimes you do have to interact with the patients in the rooms to answer any questions they may have, or may even have to demonstrate how to use a certain medication. Industry, there are a wide variety of fields you can get into in industry. I work in the pharmacovigilance side, which is drug safety. There's medical affairs, regulatory, clinical research. There's areas such as MSLs, which is a medical science liaison. Some of these, again, you can get a fellowship to help you transition more easily into these roles, but again, it's not always required. Education required. Most pharmacy schools require 6 years of education, where it's 5 years of on-campus learning, where you're taking classes such as anatomy, biochemistry, immunology, physiology, pharmacology, and therapeutics, and then 1 year of off-site clinical rotations. These are more hands-on, where you're actually in the field, you're working in hospitals or pharmacies. You could be learning about emergency room or critical care, neonatal units, pediatrics. You can be working in a retail site. You could be working in a compounding pharmacy. You could also be spending a few weeks in an industry or a pharmaceutical company. So that last year, it all depends on what your school requires. Some of them require 5 week rotations, and there's about 8 of them. Some of them they could be 6 or 7 week rotations only, and there's only 5 of them. Once you do graduate, you have the option to apply and interview for residencies or fellowships. Um, these again, they're not required. I personally did not apply for residency or fellowship, but they are out there if you are looking to specialize in a specific field, or if you're looking to specialize, go directly into the industry role. In terms of reputation or accreditation, I'm sorry, in terms of reputation, the reputation of the school you go to doesn't really matter in terms of pharmacy. All pharmacy programs, wherever you go to in the country, they are all rigorous and they are difficult. There is a saying where it's easier to get into pharmacy school than complete pharmacy school because of how difficult the program is. And that also has to do with the requirements for accreditation for all pharmacy schools. So all pharmacy schools periodically undergo an audit from the Board of Pharmacy. They have to meet a certain threshold or a certain standard in order to maintain their accreditation, in order to graduate pharmacists. Once you do graduate, there are some licensure exams you have to take. One is called the NAPLEX, which is the national board exam. in order to obtain your license. And then every state has a requirement for a state law exam. Most states call this the MPJE, but California, for example, they have a different name to it. It's the CPJE, which is a state-specific law exam. So you have to pass both these exams in order to obtain your licensure. Some states do have additional exams. For example, the state of New York, you have to take an exam in compounding, which is the mixture of medications in order to produce a product for patients. Every state has their own requirements, so you do have to you have to do your own research and look into to see what each state requires in terms of obtaining your licensure. Internship hours, these are hours worked in a pharmacy setting, whether it be a hospital or a retail setting. While you're in school, you have to log these hours. They have to be notarized, and you have to be submitted with your application as proof that you worked in a pharmacy setting at some point during your schooling. But again, those hours are very state dependent. I believe New Jersey, it's about 250 hours. Pennsylvania is about 750 hours. But again, every state has different requirements. Some states may not even have this requirement. Also, post-graduating, there are continuing education credits you have to complete in order to maintain your license. So every 2 years, you have to complete 30 hours of continuing education. These could be live presentations. These could be reading articles and answering questions. So you have to, and this is done in order so you stay up to date with medicine, because as everyone knows, medicine is a field that's constantly changing, constantly evolving. So in order to ensure that all pharmacists are staying up to date, you have to rotate, you have to do this every 2 years where you're completing the different continuing education credits. Again, every state has different rules regarding how many hours of continuing education credits you need to complete. New Jersey is 30 hours every 2 years, but again, this is very state dependent. In terms of aptitude, I just want to let you guys know that this isn't something that you're going to be pigeonholed to. These are just some recommendations, especially in terms of if some of you know what the Myers-Briggs test is. It shows kind of your personality traits. It's something I do highly recommend everyone take a look at just to get a better idea of your personality. But again, this isn't the end all be all where if you don't meet one of these criteria, you can't be a pharmacist. That's not the case. First, being extroverted. Not necessarily being extroverted in your day-to-day life. Me personally, I'm pretty introverted in my day-to-day life, but when you're extrovert, but you need to be extroverted in the sense when you're in that pharmacy setting, you need to be engaging with whoever you're speaking to, whether it's your coworkers, whether it's a patient, whether it's a doctor or a nurse. You need to be engaging and confident in your ability to express the points you're trying to get across. You need to be intuitive as a pharmacist. You need to be able to question and connect the dots. When you get an order, if you're working in a hospital and you get an order for a prescription for a patient, you need to be able to question to make sure, like, oh, this medication is appropriate for this patient. It's going to be safe for them. Is this the right dosing? You need to be able to connect the dots in the sense that this is a new medication for a patient. Is this medication okay to take with their previous medication? And you see that there's a drug-drug interaction, you need to be able to catch it. Because if you don't, it could be potentially life-threatening or fatal if you do make an error or miss a potential drug-drug interaction. You need to be someone that has a good ability when thinking about or a scientific approach. So you need to have a good knowledge of biology and chemistry, no matter what field you're in or what area of pharmacy you're in. So you need to have that ability to, think about how medications work scientifically in the human body. And judging, depending on what area of pharmacy you're working in, your ethics are going to be put into question. There's going to be situations that arise where you're going to be very uncomfortable in doing something, or you may have to frankly say no to a patient because it's in their best interest. Like personally, everyone knows about the ongoing opioid crisis in the US. You'll have patients come in with prescriptions for narcotics, and you'll see that, for example, they're getting prescriptions from 5 different doctors, and that should be a red flag to you, saying that something's not right here. So you're going to have to, put your duties and your responsibilities above everything else, and you may have to flat out say you cannot fill this prescription for this patient. You may have to keep the prescription from them just to protect them from themselves. You may have to notify the doctor that wrote the prescription about certain issues that may be occurring. But again, it can be, you'd be surprised at how much a pharmacist is responsible for on a day-to-day basis for every patient. Skills required, attention to detail. As I said previously, you need to be able to connect the dots. You need to be able to see what could be potentially fatal, life-threatening to a patient. In the industry setting, when you're working on various projects, or if you're working on various reports, some of these reports, they're going to the FDA or whatever the equivalent is in different countries around the world. So when preparing these reports, you have to make sure you have everything written. You have to dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure everything is intact, everything is accurate, and you don't want to have any errors going out. Integrity, as I said before, your ethics are going to be put into question. You're going to be put into difficult situations, and you have to make sure that you are using integrity when you're making decisions. Science and math skills. Science, again, you're taking a lot of science classes in pharmacy school. You need to have the ability to understand how medications work and affect the human body. Math skills in terms of dosing, you may have a physician or a nurse request medication for a patient, and it's the pharmacist's responsibility to calculate based on the weight and the age of the patient what is the correct dosing, and how many milligrams per hour a patient should get this medication IV. Or some hospital pharmacists are responsible for converting from patients from an IV to an oral medication. What is the equivalent change of that when you're changing from milligrams of an IV medication to milligrams of an oral medication? Interpersonal communication skills. No matter what setting you're in, you are going to either be managing a team, you're going to be reporting to a manager, or you're going to be working with other team members. So you need to be able to communicate. And one thing to keep in mind is, especially in the industry setting, everyone that you work with may not necessarily be a healthcare professional. So when you're speaking to others, they may not understand fully the medical language or be able to communicate with certain medical terms or understand certain medical terms. So you have to keep that in mind when you're communicating with others. And most importantly, communication skills with patients, especially in the retail setting where you're face-to-face with patients asking questions. Some patients are very scared trying new medications, and it's up to you to encourage them, to let them know that, no, this is a safe medication, this is how you take it as long as you follow this, or if you notice certain things happening, call me immediately and we'll help you out. Management, again, you could be managing a team, especially you could be managing a team so management skills and ability to prioritize depending on certain projects you could be working on, depending on how many prescriptions are coming in, depending on if something happens in the emergency room where something needs to be brought, a medication or something needs to be brought to them immediately, where you have to stop everything and prioritize that this needs to be done above everything else. Interests, again, you need to have a passion for helping others. That's pretty much a given in terms of pharmacy. You're going to be dealing with patients, that are in dire need of certain medications that are, whether it be a chronic medication for their blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, or someone that could be in the hospital for something more severe, something relating to someone with a cancer diagnosis, and you're preparing chemotherapy for a patient in a hospital. You could have to meet these patients in person, give them instruction on how to take a medication. And you really need to have that burn, that desire that you want to help others. You need to be interested in science and math. As I said previously, science and math are very key in understanding how medications work, and math helps calculate the dosing that's required. You want to be interested in how the human body works, how medications, how they function, how when you administer medication a certain way at a certain time, how does the physiology of it affect the human body. You need to have an interest in healthcare. Healthcare is something that's continually evolving. It's changing on a daily basis. So you need to be interested in keeping up with healthcare in order to keep yourself updated as a pharmacist. And you need to be a critical thinker. You need to be on your feet constantly. Things can get thrown at you in all different directions, but you have to ensure that the safety and well-being of the patient is above all. In terms of earning potential, so a community pharmacist on average makes $132,000 a year out of school. A hospital pharmacist makes about $128,000 a year out of school. Industry pharmacists make about $80,000 on average. But one thing to note is that in community hospital settings, that ceiling of earnings, you're kind of close to that ceiling. It doesn't go up as much. In industry, you have the ability to get promotions, change positions within the company or go to other companies and obtain a higher. So that ceiling in industry is a lot higher. And also to note that these are national averages. This could be different on a state to state basis, these average earnings. So some states you could be making more than this as an average out of school. In some states, it could be even less. It just depends on which areas of the country are looking or are desperate for more pharmacists. Work-life balance. So the typical work week is about 40 hours a week. You could have odd schedules when working in a community or hospital. So some hospital pharmacists, they work nights or they'll work 7 nights in a row and then they're off for 7 nights. Some pharmacists work weekends. Most community pharmacists, retail pharmacists work weekends. You work longer hours with fewer days per week. They are less flexible in terms of being able to switch around and get days off. So one thing to note is that when I used to work retail, there would be weekends where I couldn't find coverage if I wanted to get off. So for example, I remember I had to work on a Saturday when Eid fell on a Saturday. I had to miss like a wedding function for my cousin because I couldn't find coverage for me on a Saturday. So there's less flexibility in that sense. But typically my schedule when I worked in the community setting, I would work 2 14-hour shifts. Then I would be off for 2 days. Then I would work 3 days in a row, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then I would be off for 2 more days. But every other weekend would be a 3-day weekend, but then you would be working the other 3-day weekend the other week. In industry, it's your typical Monday to Friday. You have the more and more companies, especially since the start of COVID, are switching over to a more of a work from home approach, where typically you'll work 2 or 3 days a week from home. You go into the office 2 or 3 days a week. There's more flexibility in terms of working in an industry where, for example, if my son has a doctor's appointment, I can step away for a couple hours, take him to the doctor, come back, log back in and work. Whereas if I worked in the community pharmacy, I wouldn't be able to leave work. I wouldn't be able to leave the pharmacy. I do have some friends that work in community pharmacy. They like having this sort of schedule where they work 3 days a week. Where, like, I have a friend who she has a daughter. She works 3 days a week and she's off 4 days a week. So she spends those 4 days with her daughter. The 3 days she drops her off at her mother's house. So she likes having that flexibility where she can spend more time with her daughter those 4 days. But I mean, it all depends on what works best for you, what sort of schedule works best for you. In terms of geography, community hospital pharmacies, geography isn't really an issue. There are pharmacies and hospitals located all over the country. I have a friend that I graduated with. His dream is to just constantly move around every 2 or 3 years. So what he does is he gets licensed in a state. He works there for about 2 or 3 years. Then he gets licensed in another state, moves to that state, works there for a couple of years. Then he's just constantly moving every 2 or 3 years just to see the country. Industry, most pharma companies, they're located either in the Northeast and New Jersey area up to Boston or out in the West Coast. Some companies, they may have smaller sites in other parts of the country, but again, because they're smaller sites, there's fewer roles or positions there. So it could be more difficult finding positions in that area, in those areas. Trends of the industry, as with everything, automation is making a significant impact. But in terms of pharmacy, for counting and dispensing medications, they're looking for more and more automation where a machine will count the medication. What this allows is for the pharmacist to have more face time with patients. They can spend more time on the phone talking to doctors. They can spend more time administering immunizations or focusing on more difficult compounding medications. Which leads me to something called drug utilization review, or a DUR. What this is, it allows pharmacists to retrospectively, currently, and prospectively look at a patient's profile and their medication history helps to make things more efficient, more safe for patients. And studies have shown that when DOR is done properly by a pharmacist, particularly a pharmacist, it's decreased hospitalization and emergency room visits, which can save patients lots of money, and in the long term will save the healthcare industry lots of money. There's also the rise of mail order pharmacies, so chronic medications, so medications that patients take on a daily basis for cholesterol, diabetes, blood pressure, you name it. Some medications that are taken routinely, they can come in the mail as opposed to having a patient go into a pharmacy and have it filled, which gives retail pharmacists more time to focus on acute medication needs. And if you ever have a chance, you should take a look at Amazon trying to break into the pharmacy world with what's called PillPack. They're using their Amazon services to fill prescriptions using a dispensing service which prepackages all the patient's medications for a day or in the morning or at night in one little pouch where they can just open and just take it with the instructions on it. Also, in terms of automation, there's more. As there are teledocs, you have the ability to speak to a pharmacist over the phone or via Zoom like this, as opposed to having to go into the pharmacy and speak to them. Hospitals are using more and more automation when possible when dispensing medications using devices such as a Pyxis machine to fill more routinely used medications. So a nurse can just go and open the Pyxis machine to get the medication for their patients. Work environment. Hospitals are very much more of a team environment where you're working with other pharmacists, nurses, and doctors. Some pharmacists could be specialized in clinical or oncology or pediatrics, where if you need to discuss a certain matter with that pharmacist, you can. Nurses and doctors, you're working together constantly, where you're meeting, discussing patient profiles, patient charts and whatnot to determine what the best form of treatment is for a particular patient. So you are working together as a team for every patient. Community, you're more in charge of a team where you could be the only pharmacist on site. Everyone else around you is a technician or a cashier. So if you're the only pharmacist working that day in a retail setting, literally every file of prescription that you check that goes out is being checked by you. It has to go through you no matter what. But you have to be able to manage and lead a team in order to keep the day running smoothly and efficiently. So you have to have people standing in their right areas at the register, at the drop-off location, typing in prescriptions, checking emails. You could be having to put away the shipment of medications that come in that day. You have to do inventory. So you have to be a good manager and good team lead. Industry is very much a corporate environment. And like as I said before, coworkers aren't necessarily other healthcare professionals. So you have to keep that in mind when you're working with others. You could be working with people that are marketing people, salespeople, IT, etc. And you have to keep that in mind when you're in that setting, that not everyone has the same healthcare medical knowledge as you. And then my last slide, just some other areas of pharmacy that I'm not going to be able to expand on, but and this is again just a small amount of what you can do with a pharmacy license. Ambulatory care, where you're managing chronic conditions of a patient such as diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, glaucoma, whatnot. Infusion, these are pharmacists that physically go to the homes of patients and they administer medications intravenously to a patient. You have long-term care pharmacies or pharmacists. What they do is they're working in nursing homes. You could be a nuclear pharmacist where you're responsible for medications that contain radioactive material. So some forms of chemotherapy have that radioactive material, or even the imaging dyes that are used for MRIs. And then a compounding pharmacist, these are pharmacists that mix and combine medications for administration. So it could be a particular compound or that doesn't exist, where you might be mashing up a certain medication, mixing it together with a certain cream to be applied on the skin, or different sorts of combinations of medications. One thing that I did forget to mention, industry also, a lot of industries, they do allow you to go back to school to obtain another degree. So me personally, Pfizer actually helped pay for some of my MBA program. So they actually encourage me to go back to school to get the second degree. Whereas hospital community pharmacies, they may not be as encouraging for you to go back to get a second degree. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. That's my email address. And you could also reach out to find me on LinkedIn and message me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. With that, I'll open it up if anyone has any questions for me now.
Yes, thank you. I said that was very useful information for our students here. We've got a few questions. Let's start with Hassan Heather. You've got your hand raised. Go ahead, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you, Hassan.
Yeah, what is the most vital business aspect of a pharmacist?
In which setting?
Like making drugs and like making medications and selling them.
So making medications, you can go into fellowship, or not a fellowship, residency in compounding, where you'll learn more about the manufacturing process of it. Or you can get a fellowship at a pharmaceutical company where you can work in research and development, or R&D as they call it. So you have those two options. If you're talking about physically making the medications, it's more the compounding side. If you're talking about working in research and development, it's the industry side. And again, residencies and fellowships aren't always required. They just it may be a longer route for you to get into that sort of field.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Hussein, please unmute yourself, I guess.
Yeah, hi. I had a question just about the application process for pharmacy school. Do you guys, do you need to do shadowing of a pharmacist to get into pharmacy school? And if so, like, how do you go about doing that?
It's not required. I never shadowed. I don't know any of my friends that went to pharmacy school that had shadowed a pharmacist. I mean, it certainly helps in your application, but it's definitely not required.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ali Hassan, go ahead, please.
So I have two questions. So what would be like, what is the name of a pharmacist who creates medicine?
Pharmacist who creates medicine. There's no real name for that, because if you're talking about developing new medications, that's more of a team effort in a corporate setting. So more the research and development. If you're talking about someone that works with medications that are already made and like filling prescription orders for mixing medications, that's a compounding pharmacist.
Okay, and my second question was like, so the people who create like nuclear, they have like nuclear and radioactive materials in the medicine. Like, do they like is there a special prescription like for the people who need those type of medications?
There's either you supply it to hospitals or places that do imaging. So MRIs and whatnot, they have specific dyes or radioactive dyes that they use for imaging. So you either supply it to those sites, or there are particular nuclear, or they're called nuclear pharmacies, or specialized or specialty pharmacies, where a prescription will have to be given to them to provide it to the patient. Or they do supply chemotherapy and whatnot to hospitals.
So like if they don't give it to directly, so if they give it directly to a patient, that's technically illegal?
Yeah, it is legal. If it's a valid prescription and it's an FDA approved medication, it is legal.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right, Muhammad Abbas, go ahead, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you please tell us if there are any scholarship available for pharmacy college, and where to get more details and how to apply for the scholarship?
Scholarships are available. I don't have any offhand in front of me right now that I can provide, but if you send me an email, I can look up some for you and let you know what I find. But scholarships are definitely available for pharmacy school.
Thank you.
So a couple other questions that folks had asked, I said were, this may seem like a naive question, but for instance, you know, like the COVID-19 vaccine that was developed by Pfizer. So is that something a pharmacist does, or like what role would a pharmacist play in developing that vaccine?
So it's really a team effort, not just the pharmacist. There's a whole group of people, different positions, different roles that work in developing a new medication. Especially the COVID vaccine, with how rapidly it was produced and came about. Pretty much you need experience in research and development, or need to be involved in clinical trials in order to help develop a medication like that, especially at that speed. So again, if you do work in an industry, you can get a fellowship in something in the research and development side, or you can apply and get a job at an entry-level position in a pharmaceutical company and work your way up into that position with experience. But it's with medications and developing new medications, it really is a lot of people. It's a huge team effort. And it's not just one or two people. It's really a group of people that work together, bring their different knowledges and experiences together in developing something like this.
Awesome, thank you for that. Ali, Hassan, go ahead, please.
So my question was, how do pharmacists test new medicines, like new medicines they just created or something?
So new medicine or medications, they're tested in clinical trials. There are a lot of clinical trials. Some medications, they can be in the clinical trial before they make it to market for 15, 20 years before they make it to market because of testing. Others, like the COVID vaccine, could be a lot faster because of the research and data and prevalence of a disease. But all medications, they do undergo testing in the clinical trial phase. So whether it be where they start in an early stage with a small group of people and then build up to larger group clinical trials, and where they test the efficacy or the effectiveness of a medication, and they test how safe it is for a patient before it reaches the general public.
So, like, is there a completely different job that people who test the new medications, or is like this technically just pharmacists?
It's not just pharmacists. Clinical trials are clinical trial research. It's not limited to just pharmacists. There's physicians, healthcare professionals, others that may not necessarily be healthcare professionals, but they're just effective at medical writing or conducting clinical trials. So again, it's another thing where it's a group of people that work together in testing medications in patients.
Okay.
All right, Hassan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, do pharmacists, as a pharmacist, can you create vaccinations?
Again, going back to research and development, creating a vaccination, again, it's going through the whole clinical trial phase where you work together in a team to develop something where you where you go to the clinical trials, you test it for safety, efficacy to ensure that it does work and it is effective and it is safe. Most pharmacists now, and again, you don't necessarily have to be a pharmacist to work in research and development. There is a change in the trend in pharmacists that work in the retail setting where they are administering more immunizations, where in the past, to get an immunization administered, you have to make an appointment with your physician, go get the administration. But nowadays, you can just walk into any pharmacy. Almost all pharmacists are licensed to be immunizers, where they can administer any routine vaccination, such as a pneumonia shot, the COVID vaccine, flu shots, and whatnot.
All right.
Thank you.
So I think we beat that question to death here. Everyone wants to be famous and develop a cure for something, which is good. I like that passion. So there's a question in chat from Cheyenne. Are pharmacists in retail normally younger, fresh out of pharmacy school?
That is a very good question, yes. So every year, there's hundreds of thousands of pharmacists that are newly graduated. And as I showed in the slide with the compensation, it is a pretty decent salary when you get out of school. So everyone, especially if they have student loans, they go straight working retail. But there is that burnout where, again, you're on your feet 14 hours a day. 2 days in a row, then you're off and you're trying to recover from the long strenuous day. And then there is a burnout where then eventually you move on to different positions. Like for me, I worked at CVS throughout college to get those internship hours. Then I worked at CVS as a staff pharmacist for over 2 years. And by the end of it, it was pretty rough on me. It took its toll because you're constantly on your feet, on the phone, talking to patients and customers and talking to doctors and nurses. But yeah, generally they are younger and fresh out of school. And then once that burnout hits, they do move on to other roles.
Awesome, thank you for that. And one more question that came up was, because this is so, I guess the field requires a lot of investment in capital. Are there only a handful of companies that hire pharmacists like Novo Nordisk or Pfizer?
No, not at all. All pharmaceutical companies that are out there, there's hundreds of thousands of them around the world. They are all looking for pharmacists because of their knowledge of medications. Pharmacists are experts in medication. That's why I try to emphasize, especially in the hospital setting, how physicians rely on pharmacists to work as a team in order to determine what the best course of therapy is for a patient. Because a lot of doctors understand that pharmacists are the experts in medication, and a lot of pharmaceutical industries and companies are looking for that expertise.
And how is technology changing this field? Like companies like Genentech or the others, like what do you see in the next 5 years in this industry?
So there's a lot of gene therapy, a lot of research going into gene therapy. That looks like where it's going in the future, looking at the DNA and the genetics of a patient to help determine what the best course of therapy is. Because every human is built slightly different in terms of their genetics. So where they do genetic testing, they'll look to see, and based on the results of a certain genetic test, they can help determine which medication will be most effective for a patient. But I do see that's where the trend is going.
Thank you for that. Okay, Hassan, you have another question?
Yes. Are pharmacists in the United States are they in demand?
Pharmacists are always going to be in demand. So what's funny is my father, he's actually the one that kind of pushed me towards going into a healthcare, not necessarily pharmacy, but some sort of healthcare field, because there's always going to be a need for doctors and physicians and nurses and physicians assistants. Any sort of healthcare field is one of the quote unquote safer fields, because there's always going to be a need for healthcare professionals no matter what. As more and more things get automated, yes, there automation's here, but there's still going to be a need for healthcare professionals. And as I mentioned with one of the previous questions, how there's a burnout for the younger, most retail pharmacists are younger, but then they do eventually get burnt out. They need to be replaced by more pharmacists. So there's always going to be a need for pharmacists.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mohammed, you had another question?
How much does it cost to go to college to study to become a pharmacist?
That's also school dependent. Some universities are public and slightly cheaper. Some of them are private and more expensive, where you have to take out where you're gonna have to take out more student loans. It's also dependent on in-state, out-of-state. I know for me, I went to a private school in Philadelphia. For me at the time, it was about $30,000 a year to go to school there. I think that tuition's gone up significantly since I left. Locally, Rutgers is a state university that has a pharmacy program. They are significantly cheaper in terms of the annual tuition, but again, it's all depends on private or public school, and if you're going in-state, out-of-state.
Thank you. Okay, we're running short on time. We've got time for one more question. Mohammed, do you have your hand raised again? All right.
No.
Okay. All right, so we'd like to thank Asad for his time. Asad, thank you very much. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to address our students here. I hope you all found that useful. We'll make the recording available in the near future on our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, Asad has made his email and his LinkedIn profile also available. Any last comments? Anything, Asad?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. Again, if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to email me or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to answer whatever I can. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.